Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Alice Tang in for Tiffany Meyer. Our top story. A California water utility service seeing more than 6 million hack attempts from China in just 1 week. What's driving these persistent scans? We break it down. The number of victims in the Microsoft server hack keeps growing. Over 400 organizations now compromised, including the US. The spy campaign took off after Microsoft missed a critical software security hole. Who's behind the attacks? The US is racing to catch up as Russia and China dominate drone warfare. Why are we behind in this critical field? Hear more from a military expert.
And it's not that we don't have the capabilities, the technology and the manufacturing base to do so. We've just never engaged it in a way that prioritized drone development and manufacturing over other more larger capital projects.
And the Chinese Communist regime is facing growing fears of a sudden collapse. Experts say Washington should prepare for the fallout now. A new think tank report outlines what could follow and how U.S. special operations might be called in.
This is a very serious thing. Totalitarian regime can collapse anytime.
A water utility service in Southern California faced over 6 million hack attempts in just 1 week, all coming from China. That's roughly 600 hits every second. Security experts say the Chinese Communist Party is likely behind these suspicious attempts, testing for weaknesses in U.S. critical infrastructure. The South Coast Water District says they've been blocking these hacker attempts from last week up until this Wednesday. The district provides water services to about 40,000 residents and 1,000 businesses in Orange County, California. The CEO of cybersecurity firm ThreatStop, Tom Burns, says the number of hits jumped by 1 million overnight, averaging nearly 600 every second. For years, U.S. intelligence officials have warned that China is a top cyber threat. U.S. water systems are a vital lifeline, but often vulnerable. Parts of these utility networks are in hard-to-reach areas and were built for reliability and remote access, not cybersecurity. And smaller utilities usually don't have the resources or know-how to protect themselves from cyber attacks. This isn't just an isolated incident. Chinese regime-backed hackers have also targeted U.S. telecom companies, government agencies, and nuclear weapons programs. Just this week, they reportedly exploited a Microsoft SharePoint flaw to access sensitive U.S. defense documents. Experts say these cyber attacks are part of Beijing's broader strategy, not just to gather intelligence, but to map U.S. weak spots if tensions escalate. A recent wave of cyber attacks on Microsoft server software was hit at least 400 victims, many tied to Western government agencies. We don't yet know the full list of the victims' organizations. Microsoft linked some of the attacks to the Chinese regime, but Beijing denied the accusations. Microsoft says the attackers exploited a software vulnerability. According to the Wall Street Journal, this all started back in May at a hacking contest in Berlin. A Vietnamese researcher demonstrated how to effectively break into Microsoft SharePoint systems, Microsoft version of Google Drive. Following this contest, Microsoft released a security patch in July, but the bugs were already being exploited a day before the patch went live. No one knows how the hackers figured it out. On top of that, researchers discovered Microsoft's fix didn't fully work, and hackers could still break in. Soon, a cybersecurity firm called iSecurity discovered a way to get backdoor access into SharePoint servers. This gave hackers remote access to the servers. Microsoft rushed out another fix to block the attack for good. But by that point, dozens of organizations using Microsoft's SharePoint servers had already been compromised. That included US and European government agencies, local institutions, and universities. The Energy Department later confirmed it was affected, but stated no sensitive information was exposed. However, according to Bloomberg, the National Nuclear Security Administration was impacted heavily due to this exploit. Drones rapidly reshaping modern warfare. Russia and China are racing to dominate this new battlefield, testing drones in repeated attacks on Ukraine. Now the U.S. is working to catch up, and fast. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth announced sweeping changes earlier this month to boost America's drone defense capabilities. Here's what he said.
So while our adversaries have produced millions of cheap drones, before us, we were mired in bureaucratic red tape. Not anymore. First, we're going to bolster the U.S. drone manufacturing base by producing thousands of American-made products, prioritizing Buy American. We'll arm combat units with a variety of low-cost, American-crafted drones, leveraging our world-leading engineers and AI experts. And third, we're going to train as we expect to fight. Senior officers, well, I'll grab this.
The memo Hegseth signed at the end of his remarks aims to cut through red tape, slowing U.S. drone innovation and production. This follows an executive order from President Trump aimed at unleashing the productivity of the U.S. drone industry. Based on lessons learned on Ukraine's battlefields, the Pentagon is now focusing on boosting production of cheap, long-range drones. But with growing threats from Russia and China, where does the U.S. stand on drone defense capabilities? Retired Lieutenant Colonel Darin Gaub, a former Black Hawk helicopter pilot, breaks it down.
Specifically, we're falling short mostly in the ability to field the amount of equipment that we need to deal with a mass drone threat across a larger battlefield. We have it, it's just very small quantities, and that's really the main concern. And unfortunately, we're about 20 years behind.
Why is the U.S. so behind in such a critical combat capability?
We're behind mostly China because of their ability to mass manufacture drones. So we have the ability to catch up quickly, but we're currently behind in that. And it's not that we don't have the capabilities, the technology and the manufacturing base to do so. We've just never engaged it in a way that prioritized drone development and manufacturing over other more larger capital projects like fighters, aircraft carriers, and tanks, things like that.
With full throttle support from the Pentagon, U.S. drone manufacturing is ramping up fast. Secretary Hegseth says he expects simulated drone warfare to become a regular part of U.S. forces combat training. The Pentagon is also developing a new digital platform to track all approved drone parts, including performance reviews. That system is set to launch next year. The Hudson Institute is sounding the alarm on what could happen if China's communist regime suddenly collapsed. The influential think tank outlines how the United States should prepare, not just for the immediate fallout, but for the long-term global impacts if the world's second-largest economy were to unravel. Here are the details.
When talking about the collapse of the Chinese regime, how realistic is this scenario? Mao Zhu, director of the China Center at the Hudson Institute, weighs in.
You know who else is thinking about the regime collapse? The regime? Every day is the CCP itself. Every day it lives in paranoia. Everything they do, every international engagement with the United States is about how fragile the regime is. They want us to not to do that to inspire Chinese people to basically to change the regime. So this is a very serious thing. Totalitarian regime can collapse anytime.
The Hudson Institute recently released a report with recommendations on China after communism, what the U.S. should do if the long-ruling communist regime suddenly collapses. The report has 9 chapters, including a focus on how U.S. Special Operations Forces could help secure China's stability and integration into the global community. One key task for the forces is securing weapons of mass destruction and related materials. The report also suggests expanding cooperation with Taiwan to showcase alternative governance models.
For the United States to make the point that an independent Taiwan is the best thing for a post-communist China, ensuring that it exists as this comprehensive university of how to have transitioned from at least authoritarianism and to conduct a sort of ethnic Chinese pluralistic democracy would be essential for the mainland to make the same transition.
I think Taiwan's model is probably inspirational as well as material to impact the post-communist scenario.
In a panel discussion on China after communism, experts say a post-CCP China should be positioned as a sovereign, stable member of the international community. It would need to help counter threats from Russia and North Korea. Beijing is currently facing domestic and international troubles. These include drastically slowing economic growth, high youth unemployment, political corruption within the CCP. There are also rising tensions with the US and other Western nations, along with coercive policies towards the global South, developing nations in Africa, Latin America, and parts of Asia. Experts on China affairs say recent political turmoil in the CCP's top ranks is creating further instability in the regime's authority. The US must prepare for the possible changes instead.
Two of America's biggest financial institutions are under scrutiny for their roles in helping Chinese battery giant CATL go public on the U.S. stock market. Lawmakers have subpoenaed the bank CEOs, saying they've been stonewalled in their efforts to get answers. NTD's Melina Weisskopf has more.
CEOs of JP Morgan and Bank of America are under scrutiny for their role backing a Chinese military tech giant. The institutions worked on the listing of Contemporary Imperex Technology, or CATL, a leading battery manufacturer which supplies to EV makers like Tesla. The House Select Committee on the CCP said this company directly poses U.S. investor and national security risks because it's a sector explicitly targeted by China's state-driven military-civil fusion policy. The Department of Defense added cattle to its list of Chinese military companies operating in the United States. Lawmakers previously urged JP Morgan and Bank of America to pull out of their roles in underwriting it and ask the CEOs questions about their involvement, only to be stonewalled, according to Chairman John Molinar. The chairman wrote, "Wall Street shouldn't be underwriting Chinese military companies, and the American people deserve transparency." Reporting from Washington, D.C., Melina Weisskopf, NTD News.
Responding to the subpoenas, a Bank of America spokesperson said the bank has had constructive engagement with the committee and will continue to engage. JP Morgan declined to comment, but back in May, the bank defended its role in the CATL's U.S. listing, saying it, quote, did a lot of due diligence related to the company as it went public. Coming up, the U.S. needs more naval ships to counter China. Now, shipbuilding is turning into a bargaining chip in South Korea's tariff talks with Washington. We've got the details. Secret Chinese-run police outposts, 9 in total, operating in France. The French government is now officially acknowledging their presence. Britain is at risk of becoming a dumping ground for goods made with forced labor, including from China. That's according to a new report from the UK Parliament's human rights watchdog. That and more in just a minute here on China in Focus. Welcome back to China in Focus. I'm Alice Tang in for Tiffany Meyer. Countering China has become a key factor in trade talks between the U.S. and South Korea. The two countries are discussing a shipbuilding tie-up, which could include investments to modernize U.S. shipyards and more support to repair the U.S. naval fleet. So what's in it for the U.S.? The goal is to catch up to China's growing naval fleet. As for South Korea, it could mean better tariff deals for its exports to the U.S. Here's more.
Pressure is growing for South Korean officials to reach a deal on tariffs after Japan's success in striking a trade agreement with the U.S. this week. Now a shipbuilding partnership is one idea being discussed, according to government and industry sources, in exchange for better terms. A source says the tie-up would see Seoul invest in modernizing U.S. shipyards and give more help to repair U.S. Navy vessels. South Korean trade officials who declined to be named says the country's proposal of a, quote, Korea-U.S. manufacturing renaissance partnership in areas such as shipbuilding had drawn strong U.S. interests. Donald Trump has made it a priority to revamp the aging U.S. shipbuilding industry in order to keep up with China, the market leader. His interest in Korean shipbuilding dates back to a 1998 helicopter trip to visit Goje Shipyard. Lim Moon-kyu, a retired senior executive at the former Daewoo Shipbuilding Company, remembers accompanying the VIP guest who stood on top of a high crane to view the yard on a southern island.
I think he must have felt that the size of the ship and shipyard were humongous.
Clearly, he was impressed, saying wonderful, wonderful, since he didn't know about shipbuilding. Lim thinks the occasion left a lasting impression on Trump that primed him to work with Korean shipbuilders to counter China. What carrots can we give to the United States except shipbuilding? Nothing but shipbuilding will be immediately possible, helpful to South Korea, and a huge help to the US. The repair of US Navy ships already happens in South Korea at Hanwha Ocean's Goje shipyard, which has the world's largest dock. Hanwha has also recently increased its stake in an Australian shipbuilder which owns a shipyard in Alabama building US Navy vessels. And another South Korean shipbuilder, HD Hyundai, formed a partnership this year with US defense-focused shipbuilder Huntington Ingalls. A researcher told Reuters the most realistic option for South Korea is to make a deal to fix a certain number of US Navy vessels annually or build parts for new ships. But obstacles remain to expanding the relationship. Woo Jong-hoon, a marine expert at Seoul National University, says US yards struggle to obtain parts and find local talent, while there's also a raft of US regulations that protect domestic shipbuilding.
Ultimately, I think it is necessary for the South Korean government to control Hanwha and HD Hyundai well, to establish a strategy and become a control tower that can make suggestions to the United States.
Wu said South Korea could skirt US regulations by building sections of ships to be delivered to US yards for assembly, or they could designate a South Korean shipyard as a special district where it's permitted to make US naval vessels.
Secret Chinese-run police outposts operate in France. Though not officially police stations, they reportedly carried out surveillance and repression, raising concerns over foreign interference. French government has now acknowledged their presence. NTD's international correspondent David Vivez has the details.
France's Interior Ministry has publicly confirmed the existence of 9 Chinese secret police centers on French soil. Although not officially labeled as police outposts, these centers were operated by unofficial liaison officers working for China. They offered services resembling state functions and carried out unauthorized activities such as intelligence gathering, transnational repression, and talent scouting. MEP Raphael Glucksmann has been sounding the alarm for 2 years. He said the presence of secret Chinese police stations in Paris represents direct interference from Beijing and a violation of French sovereignty.
You know, not far from here, there was a secret Chinese police station on our soil in our capital. I chaired the special committee on interference, and I can tell you that China is now a force for internal destabilization in our democracies. I think our sovereignty is being trampled on. Our nations must stop allowing themselves to be treated like doormats by authoritarian regimes whose principles and interests are fundamentally hostile to ours.
A 2022 report from the NGO Safeguard Defenders revealed the existence of over 100 such stations worldwide. French intelligence became increasingly alarmed after uncovering covert involvement from the Chinese embassy. In June, a Paris court arrested a Chinese businessman suspected by French intelligence of operating a secret Chinese police station from within a Fujian business association. Glucksmann says Western nations must take a firmer stance toward China.
I met with a European diplomat stationed in China. He came to me and said, "I think you'll never understand." I said, "We'll never understand what?" He said, "You'll never understand how much the Chinese regime wants us, the Westerners, to fail. It's an extremely deep ideological hostility."
This marks the first time French authorities officially acknowledged what had only been suspected until now. David Vives, NTD News, Paris.
A new report says Britain is at risk of being a dumping ground for goods made with forced labor from countries like China. This finding came from the UK's Parliament Human Rights Watchdog. NTD's international correspondent Malcolm Hudson has more.
Could Britain be flooded by goods made from forced labour? A new report, Forced Labour in UK Supply Chains, warns current laws make this inevitable and highlights human rights abuses are pervasive in key sectors. To solve this, the UK's Joint Committee on Human Rights, made up of British politicians, is proposing import bans for goods linked to forced labour. with the view to bring UK standards in line with the approach taken by the US and in the EU. Former President Biden in 2021 banned imports from China's Xinjiang region over forced labor concerns. The report cited estimates that globally, 20% of garments made with cotton have been linked to forced labor in China's Xinjiang region, made by Uyghurs and other persecuted minority groups. Fish supply chains are also at risk. Evidence suggests North Korean workers are being forced to work on Chinese fishing vessels. In some cases, these North Koreans do not set foot on land for over 10 years. Fish caught are processed in China and sold on markets in Europe and America. The UK imported $415 million worth of fish from China in 2023, making China the UK's second biggest supplier. Other at-risk goods include processed tomatoes labelled as Italian but likely originating from Xinjiang, solar panels made in China, and critical minerals mined by children in the Democratic Republic of Congo, who are exposed to toxic dust with no protective equipment. The British politicians behind the report call on the government to implement mandatory human rights due diligence and penalties for firms that break these requirements. The report said Britain's approach has fallen behind other key markets like the EU and US, which means the UK is at risk of becoming a dumping ground for goods that cannot be sold elsewhere. The report also urged the government to avoid entering into negotiations with countries participating in state-imposed forced labour. Lord David Alton, chairman of the Joint Committee on Human Rights, said it's intolerable in the 21st century that the UK profits on the broken backs of slave labour, from Uyghur servitude in Xinjiang to child labour in the cobalt mines of the Congo, and called for meaningful action from the government. A government spokesperson said they have launched a review into the UK's approach to responsible business conduct as part of their trade strategy, and will consider the Joint Committee's recommendations. Malcolm Hudson, NTD News.
That's all for today's China in Focus. I'm Alice Tang, in for Tiffany Meyer. If you have any feedback on the show or have something you'd like to see us cover, send us an email at chinainfocus@ntd.com. We love to hear from you. For round-the-clock original news coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for watching. See you soon.